off acknowledging just yes, saying hello, welcome. Thanks so much, Rosemary, for organising this and the rest of the team there that's done that. And yeah, it's great to be here alongside Lan and Vicky. And I just wanted to acknowledge those that have gone before us, and of course everyone that's come along tonight to listen. And you know, it's been interesting three or 2.5 years for us this term, and we've had a lot of interesting challenges with the COVID stuff, like everyone is facing. But we've managed to make a few, or I think, some really good changes within Environment Canterbury. And this annual plan is what we're talking about tonight. It's definitely a reflection of where we're trying to head, where we're trying to push things. But the work's not done, of course. We've got many things that we need to continue with, and looking forward to continuing on with that, hopefully later in the year. So I'll just do a karakia to start our meeting, and then we'll. Have we got the slide show up? I just can't see it only on my phone at the moment. Yeah, I'll do a karakia and then we'll get into the presentation. Ai he karakia timatanga o tātou nei hui. Ki mi hia rapu hia whae te uru tapu nui a tāne. Ka haia te ata, ka hapara te ata, ka koro ki te manu, ka warari te kutu, ka te ata nui, ka horaina, ka taki te umeri, he pō, he ao, ka wotia, a ti hei, mauri ora. So kia ora koutou, welcome everybody. Well, I might just hand over to Lan and Vicky just briefly, and then we'll get back to the presentation just so they can introduce themselves. Ka pai.
Oh, kia ora, Craig. Thank you. Kia ora tātou, everybody. My name is Lan Farm, and I'm one of the Environment Canterbury councillors in my second term, but my constituency is Christchurch Central or Hokoru Ward. And I just thought I'd just mention a bit of a, so we have some idea of how the evening's going to play out. So we're going to try like fly through some sort of high level annual plan content till about 8 o'clock, and then so then for those of you who need to take off, that's fine, but then we'll have annual plan questions for like half an hour, and then we thought we could sort of broaden it out, which might happen anything, right? Because everything's connected and that kind of thing, but we'll try kind of keep it annual plan focused so everyone knows about what they can put in their submission, and then we can sort of talk more broadly is the broad plan for the evening. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your time with us tonight. Kia ora, and kia ora, Vicky.
So kia ora. I'm a bit of a rookie with Zoom, so I will try and get this to work. It looks like I still can only either see the screen with the slides or I can see people, and it's a bit unnerving talking to a blank screen, but anyways, that's what it's going to be. So kia ora koutou, ko Vicky Southworth tōku ingoa. I'm Canterbury Environment Canterbury Councillor for South Christchurch, Wāwhanga. And I'll just jump straight into the slides and we can talk about our annual plan, and hopefully you'll feel motivated at the end and want to put in a submission and give us some of your support and your ideas. So I will switch to our slides now. Okay, so hopefully you can, could someone just tell me you can see the slide, and if I just go to this one now, has that shifted?
Good.
So yeah, so this just gives a quick overview. There's Canterbury as you know it, and we're broken down into different constituencies, and our region is actually 45,000 kilometres square, so one of the biggest. And we have 86% of our population actually within the Greater Christchurch area, which is Waimakariri, Selwyn and Christchurch. Now can I just check, is it my computer making a funny noise, or is that someone else can hear?
It's just Craig.
Right.
I'm just going to mute Craig.
Craig, that's really distracting. Yeah, so there's our region. 86% of our population in that concentrated area around Christchurch. And I just thought I just commented on it earlier in the pre-chat. If anyone, for those who were there, you know, climate change is something that's absolutely with us now. It's not something we're talking about as sometime in the future, a future generation, you know, maybe worst case our kids, and obviously we care about them, but actually we're seeing it now, and there's modelling that demonstrates that events occurring today have a greater percentage of impact than what they would have had with the same set of circumstances some years before we had so much carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And this is just showing it's actually on our doorstep as well. So these are a couple of pictures taken out of the press from Franks Peninsula. And then, you know, one part of the year we had drought, high concern about lack of rainfall. By the end of the same year, we had a significant flood that was just before Christmas. And just to also highlight that it's not just about carbon dioxide, it's not just about climate change. Actually, we have ecological loss as well. And it's these two really significant issues, and of course equity and the way we conduct ourselves in sort of social context and economics is another part of the whole big puzzle. But this ecological loss is substantial, significant, but actually we've got some great examples of projects that are occurring right on our doorsteps that are turning things around and going in the right direction, but there is so much more to do. And so that's just highlighting really two key things that we have absolutely central in our thinking when we're looking at budgets, Environment Canterbury, and when we're talking about these opportunities that we can help deliver through Environment Canterbury. These two aspects, climate change and the biodiversity, are absolutely front and centre. And really just to highlight as well, you know, when Craig and I, as first term councillors, and Lan going into her second, when we started this new term, none of us would have imagined COVID-19 occurring. You know, we were aware of climate emergency, that was something that had been signalled and we were aware of, but COVID-19 of course came in and has made this last 2.5 years really messy. But at the same time, opportunities in that there was grants came through with Shovel Ready and Jobs for Nature and Environment Canterbury. We did have projects that we could apply for quite rapidly apply for some substantial funding through those schemes. And the Shovel Ready, for example, looking at doing planting across the berms across our region, and we and some other flood-related projects that amounted to about $20 odd million worth of funding, of which $8.5 million came from rates, and the remaining $16 million came from central government. I think climate emergency is really, more and more people are aware of this, so it's becoming easier to have conversations about climate change and the need to put rates in and start looking at work that's going to make us more resilient, and as well as reducing emissions. And that then brings me to public transport, which we've lost 30% of our patronage through the COVID-19 pandemic period. We have also had driver shortages, which in part has been driven by a lack of immigration. Often our drivers have come from migrants, and you know, these sort of various compounding issues, and we've got costs going up, and you know, some of it brings positives, so cost of fuel going up might bring more passengers, but ultimately we need to do so much more to get more people on our buses. And these three issues going on here are also linked, and of course the floods in particular, and bringing down emissions, it's very much that the issues are all connected. So this is a very wordy slide, and apologies for that. It's really just, it's a reminder list for the three of us. So I'll switch you across to Lan and to Craig to talk to some of these parts. Really just showing that in our long-term plan, so last year we did a long-term plan that was from 2021 to 2031, 10 years worth of budgets and work programs. And we're now just stepping into year 2. Now, you might remember last year we went out with another significant proposed increase on our rates of 24%, it was last year. And a chunk of that was to do with getting funding enough to match some of the grant funding from government and make the most of that COVID-19 shovel-ready opportunity, which we used for river engineering regional pests. But we also recognise things like, for example, many schools sitting on the waiting list for Enviro schools. And that was a huge opportunity. You know, we need to educate young people And we also picked up on the It's Time Canterbury campaign and put that together. Again, recognising an opportunity and a need for behaviour change and for communication. These were things that we could put into our budgets that were not the just business as usual type work that we might have had previously. And that obviously then means an uplift in the rates and the costs. And then public transport, the number one tool that we have at Environment Canterbury to reduce emissions, and that's something that we really push to put more into, and also looking at bringing in more electric vehicles and increasing the frequency on routes, and down the line looking at increasing some of the route network as well. There's a various future opportunities, things like My Way, which is an on-demand bus. So we're putting money into that, but these things cost money, and hence we already had a substantial potential proposed uplift for this year 2 of 18.8%. I'll just pass you across to Lan to talk to Craig to talk about Mea Ururako next.
Hey, kia ora, Vicky. Thanks for that. Thanks for the great start. Yeah, so one of the programs that we put in the last long-term plan as something new was the program called Mea Ururako, which is really about trying to support regeneration of Indigenous biodiversity across the region, just to recognise all the great work that's already going on out there from a lot of trusts and community groups and landowners. So it was to try to gather more funding to put to that cause and to distribute out to those groups. There was some budget in there also to do some work on Environment Canterbury land, because we do own a lot of exotic forest land, and so there was a bit of work going to go into looking at a different way of doing that, including more biodiversity within those lands through this program, as well as some coordination costs. And in the last annual plan, we managed to get a distribution of money that went out to the Kiwi2 Trust, quite a significant amount, to help their great work. So that was good. And we, hence, like Vicky said, that's that extra increase there. Unfortunately, we have had to make a small cut for this year's annual plan. We're proposing to, just to try to bring the rates down a little bit. But of course, if people think that that's not a good idea and they want to see that increased or put back, then by all means, put that in your submissions. And Braided River Revival is a project, really a non-statutory sort of strategy planning process for our braided rivers, to try and get, again, a new way of managing our rivers, which really is about coordination amongst all the agencies that have to come together to look after them, including LINZ as a big player as they administer a lot of the riverbeds, DOC, of course, as well as the district councils, us, and of course the Papatipu Ruranga. So that work is going on in the background. We had an update on this program recently. There's a lot of good work going on, but it is a lot of stuff that you don't see at the moment, because it's all about the coordination between those agencies and trying to get everyone on the same page. But I'm confident that that'll lead to a better way of doing things going forward and some outcomes on the ground in time. I'm going to hand over to Lan for this information about compliance.
Kia ora, Craig. So in summary, we've got there more compliance staff, because that's kind of the simplest way of communicating it. But actually the compliance focus is more than just increase in staff. And I think it's about 6 to 8 staff, but it's actually also through a program which we're calling Innovative Regulator. And it's about tackling sort of issues that have been ongoing for decades, things like dust and quarry issues out at Yoldhurst, which Craig's been really involved with, and also at Bromley with offensive and objectionable odours is the terminology used. So we're testing different apps, we're testing anything we can that can actually collect information that allows ECAN to undertake its job as a regulator and actually impose fines or abatement notices and that kind of thing. As part of it though, we're also trying to, wherever we can, advocate, obviously, in terms of the new RMA reforms, about actually bolstering the fines that are available to us, because we know they're just absolutely pitiful. And I think there is good appetite to do that, and Eugenie might know more about that. The Waitaha Action to Impact Fund, I mean, this is a fund that we established with the idea that we could increase it a lot over time. It's still currently only 100K, and the last year, which was the first year that it ran, we had applications totaling 800K. So it just shows, you know, the appetite is there and the community commitment is there to be doing all these fantastic things. And really our support is very minor, at least when it comes to contestable funds. The other really super significant piece of work within the long-term plan is the integrated planning framework, which we call Te Kore Koreka. And this is basically a review of our regional policy statement, our coastal environment plan, and our land and water regional plan all together. So this is under the new freshwater standards. Now, what we're trying to do with this is get rid of the siloed planning and go the way that the RMA reforms are already, you know, clearly signalling that we need to go, which is a integrated mountains to sea plan where everything's connected and you don't need to go to some other planning document to find out what you can and can't do. It's all in one place. The really key thing about that is it's our focus at this stage is absolutely with mana whenua and having that conversation with mana whenua, because so much of it is about te mana o te wai, which is the, you know, key bit of the freshwater legislation, and that's basically the mana or the health of the water coming first above human needs and economic needs. So that's a really key change, and it's something that we're really excited about. I do want to note the timing. We're only notifying that integrated plan in 2024, but actually that should communicate to you, I hope, the scale of change, you know, going from the RMA balancing, you know, environment and economy and that kind of thing, to where the environment actually comes first and where we're looking for positive environmental outcomes. So it's really huge. But we're not focusing on any of that apart from this overview tonight, because that's just already in the long-term plan, but we didn't want to lose sight of it. Kia ora.
Bear with me here. Right. So that was just giving you that overview of where we were already at, starting with our year 2 budgets. And then we've now picked up we've put forward in our consultation document 3 topics for conversation, 2 of which affect the rates proposal in terms of percentage rise. And so you will have perhaps seen the headline in the press and in our document, if you've read it so far, of around 24%, about 24% rate rise, which is the difference from that 18.8 to the 24. So the first one we're looking at, or we'll discuss, is the new bus fare structure. So just to flag, really, talked about climate change. The bus is our only tool really to reduce emissions at this point in time. And when you look at Christchurch particularly, transport emissions account for 54% of our carbon emissions, which is huge. Now, the land transport component is actually 36%, but it's really fundamentally important. This is fossil fuel emissions. This is absolutely the foundation, the tap that keeps on flowing and keeps on contributing to greater and greater climate change. So this is absolutely what we need to be tackling. We've gone completely the wrong way through COVID, losing 30% of our patronage, albeit, of course, many people are now working from home, but we expect that will start to change as we become essentially more familiar, unfortunately, with COVID being in our community, and life starts to gradually get back to a bit more normality. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people carry on working from home to a fair extent, but there will nevertheless be, of course, more travel. And we really need to make sure that we're not getting back into cars, but we're looking at walking, cycling and public transport. And so public transport, the bus network, is the bit that Environment Canterbury can have influence on. And so we're proposing to make some changes to our bus fare structure to try and encourage a rapid increase in the number of people using our bus. So this is again a bit of a busy slide, but just to give you some figures on the public transport savings that could be made with the 3 different proposals or options that we've put into our document. The one that as a council that we've really got behind and are putting forward as our preferred option is a targeted free fare option. So that's for under 25s, tertiary students, mobility card holders and community service card holders. So the thinking behind this is to get more younger people using the bus, so it becomes a habit, so that they're using the bus right through all these changes in life, from going from school into university or into apprenticeship and into early jobs. And so that's the purpose of an under 25 proposal for fare free. And then of course the equity aspect, which is another really fundamental thing that's we need to really get on top of. That's the community service cards and the mobility card is addressing some of that equity issue, and of course the tertiary students as well. So for a family who've got 2 school-aged children, a fare free option could deliver $1,143 per year saving on their current transport spend on the bus. If you have 2 school-aged children going to school 5 days a week for 40-week term, that's $1,200 a year. Now, in reality, a lot of parents will just simply be driving their children because that's a lot of money to be spending. And so this is a real incentive for families, even, you know, reasonably comfortable, affluent families. That's still a decent saving. So the thinking is that this will really incentivize more families, more children to be using public transport. An adult with a community service card, if you just taking an example of somebody who's using the bus 3 days a week through the year, currently they would be spending $826.80 a year on that travel, and they will be able to save $770 with the targeted fare free. So it's not inconsequential amounts. This is a real opportunity to both incentivize, but also to support people who struggle with the cost of transport currently. The second option that we're putting forward is a flat fare, which would get rid of all of the zoning. So currently we have a zone 1, 2 and 3. And the vast majority of Christchurch is zone 1, and 95% of trips are within zone 1. But this will be getting rid of those zones 2 and 3 where the fares actually ramp up. But the proposal is to have a flat fare, $2 for adults, $1.20 for children. Now, if you live in Christchurch and you're within zone 1, or if you live in Lincoln and you just travel within Lincoln on the bus, you still travel on the zone 1 fare, you could be looking at saving around $218 a year with the option 2 as a school group using the bus, or a community service card holder, it would save a little less at $181 a year. And just to highlight that as well, gold card holders who also have a community service card, which is, I understand, not that uncommon, will also have then access not just to free fares during off-peak times, but will have free fares all day, just as other free fare parts of the community will also have access all day. So the off-peak travel free only, which gold card holders currently have, will go. The cost of option 1 for an average property value in Christchurch is around $57 per year. And so for a gold card holder to save that back, they'd be needing to use the bus during a peak time trip twice per month. The option 2 for cost for an average Christchurch property is around $22. And so they will then be needing to use their do a peak time trip 3 times per month per month to pay back that $22. And this is just to flag that this year the proposed changes in fares will actually occur from February of next year, so it's not a full financial year. And option 1 for this year, including other increases in our service, so we also have high frequency will be going on to Route 28 and Route 17, which just had a consultation carried out. There's also electric vehicles being bought. So by the end of this year, we'll have 58 electric vehicles, of which that will make up 20% of our fleet. So these types of improvements, plus an option 1 fare-free component from February of this financial year, will be a cost of just under $50 for a typical Christchurch house, and just under 20 for Selwyn and 36.50 for Waimakariri. And then option 2 comes in a little bit less at $35 with the option 2, because that's allowing also in there those improvements in the service. Now, the important part to look at here is the increase in patronage. So in this year 1, the expected increase in patronage is 16% with the option 1, that targeted fare free, compared with option 2, which is a 6% increase. And then option 3 is tertiary students getting a child fare only, and that's a important change, and that will happen from July of this year. But it only increases by the patronage and total patronage by 1%, because it's quite a core group, a small group of people relative to the population and the patronage. And in year 2, option 2 will actually rise to a 22% increase in patronage. So we're heading back quite rapidly to where we were at before COVID began. Now, this is based on modelling, so there's some degree of uncertainty in this, but it's certainly heading in the right direction. The option 2 is predicted for running for the full year. The second year of fare reductions would pick up to a 9% increase in patronage. So a fair bit less than our option 1. So just putting those in that information there for you. So that's me done, and now in my section, and I will pass this now across to Lan. I think we'll be speaking to the flooding.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you, Vicky. I hope you guys can hear me and see me. I think you can, seeing Vicky's muted. I've just gone all blank on my screen, but I'm sure it will come back at some stage. So kia ora, thanks Vicky. Just to add a little bit to the free fares aspect, it did take quite a lot of council iterations and actually failed decision making of getting in anything more substantial than that targeted free fare proposal. But I just wanted to flag that, because although it is our preferred option, I really want you to know that it's not a given. We are absolutely, obviously, open to community voice on this, but that around the council table, it's not unanimous or anywhere near it by any means. And so if we can get it across, we really so badly do need community voices encouraging that. So yeah, just please do what you can to make it happen. The aspect that I'm going to talk about is flood protection, and I'm really just going to highlight, well, we all know that climate change is very much a here and now thing. Vicky's referred to that numerous times in Auckland at the moment, but nothing paints that more starkly than big weather events that Auckland is experiencing right now. So, and we know that these are going to increase. In May 2021, we had a absolutely massive flood event. It was a regional state of emergency. Towns like Springfield were actually evacuated, and it actually impacted 10 state highways and essentially severed that connection from one part of the South Island to the other. I came across just the other day actually that MB had done a study where they actually tried to quantify the amount of that event that was definitely caused by human-induced climate change, and they came up with about 10 to 15% of it. So, and that's obviously always a conservative estimate. So we know that, yeah, this is what's coming, and I don't need to tell you guys that. When it comes to the total cost of recovering from that event, though, it's about $20 million. Now, because of the sort of national level, or at least regional state of emergency, NEMA, which is the National Emergency Management Agency, I think the A is, have come to the table with $7.5 million, but we need to co-fund our share, or our Environment Canterbury's share, which is about $12.2 million. Now we're proposing to borrow that over 2 years, so 6.1 million each year, and then repay it over 10 years using a general rate. Now, why we want to flag this is a real change from how we would typically fund recovery from floods than we usually do. So usually we have about an 80% targeted rate, which is targeted to those properties essentially adjacent to the actual waterway, but they might be further back, and there's different risk profiles which we use to assess who pays what, basically. And then often there's an aspect of about 10 to 15%, which is paid by the general rate, which kind of tops up those amounts. Now, why we're wanting to draw people's attention to this change to the general rate in terms of charging everybody to recover from this flood is that we're well aware that, you know, these events are going to happen more and more, and we actually need to pay. Well, our council's view is that we all need to pay together. We can't be lumping the costs on those directly beside the water bodies. We can in other ways, like our planning framework and that kind of thing, be looking at things like managed retreat and managing our rivers in a much better way where we allow the river to be a river. But when it comes to the actual costs and when we're protecting people primarily, but also property to an extent, it should be shared across the region. So really interested in people's views on that. Kia ora. Oh, and then, yeah, let's go to the next slide, Vicky. I can't remember exactly what it says now because it's still blank. But basically this slide was meant to offer you a bit of a snapshot about where we've come through. Because when I say flood protection and flood management, often people just think of, like, you know, getting the bulldozers in and putting in massive stop banks and hard infrastructure to try, you know, protect us from the river. But increasingly, and where we as councillors are really heartened that Environment Canterbury as an organisation is going, with our, you know, guidance, of course, is much more into the managing rivers for a number of values. So when we're talking about infrastructure protection, there's actually ecological principles that come into that, and we're thinking of biodiversity values, recreational values, community amenity, things like that. And we're also thinking a much longer time horizon. So it used to be, you know, 10 to 30 years maximum would be the horizon where you'd think about your flood protection infrastructure. We're now talking about how can we look out, you know, 100, 200 years and actually be using that kind of cost benefit analysis to highlight the fact that hard infrastructure is usually, when you look out at that time frame, not the answer, and it's actually much more about nature-based solutions and using ecological restoration principles in that space. So yeah, I hope that explained that slide. And now I'll hand to Craig for the last aspect. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Lan. Kia ora, Vicky. Hey, yeah, this is the last bit of the presentation. It's just about the proposed, getting feedback on a proposed climate change levy to enable us to gather more resources across the region to help us with climate change mitigation and adaptation into the future. This is something that a bunch of us councillors sort of put forward in recent times as a way to try to gather those resources right across the region, rather than just from either you do it for public transport from an urban point of view, or you know, trying to do the river rating as we've just seen from the rural landholders. We think this is a way to try to pull this together under a better umbrella and to bring more focus to climate change issues. And that's something that we've worked really hard on this term, and acknowledge Vicky for her leadership in this space. Because you'll know that in the last term, Lan and the previous councillors did the climate declaration. And so this was something that we wanted to take on in this term. And so we've made sure that the climate change is at every standing item at every council meeting. We have the climate change portfolio that we put that into the name of one of the portfolios. And now we have a climate change action committee that actually has some external representatives on it too. So this is just a progression from that work we've brought to council. And it's great to see that it's got into this annual plan so that we can hear from the community about how they feel about this and if they think this is a good idea. So I'm not going to talk for too much longer. I think you get it. But it's just a way that we can bring that resources together and try to do more. And that's this is our last slide here, just to show you the link to make a submission. And of course, it's due. The submissions are due on April the 3rd. Yeah, I think we're keen for questions now. I don't know how we're going to work that, but Rosemary, are you going to be able to look at the hands up or something like that?
Sure. Kia ora, Craig. Just before we go to questions, I thought I'd just chip in a little bit on the climate levy, just because really drawing your attention to the emissions graph, because when you look at like in Christchurch, 54% of emissions are from transport, but when you look at Canterbury as a whole, or Waitaha as a region, 64% of our emissions are from agriculture, and a lot of those are methane, which we know has, you know, an even greater impact than carbon. But why we really want to highlight that is that transport actually comes way down the line within households. I think it's about 10%. And again, sorry, I can't see the screen, but something like that. But we wanted to highlight that because we're hoping the climate levy can be a way that we can charge, essentially help the whole region pay for climate initiatives, because we currently have very few, if not zero, tools to or levers to actually address the agricultural emissions part of it. Now, the government are working on this, but yeah, we're yet to like have anything tangible that we can work with. So that's why we're so focused on the transport aspect. And the transport aspect is what could be funded by the climate levy. So for example, a general rate across Canterbury could be exactly what funds free PT or ecological restoration projects, that kind of thing. So yeah, just some
okay. I'll keep going on that. How would that how would decisions be made with that? For instance, if there was another major flood, would that levy money help to pay for that, to fund that?
It could. It would have to be basically, you'd have to be really clear about what the actual levy was for, because obviously we'd be rating under the Local Government Act. So yeah, you could have a number of things that then is open to council discretion about how they pay for it. Or if the community are like, no, we want to see something really specific. And we actually had someone at Forest and Bird last night ask about how we might better reduce synthetic fertiliser. And just an idea that came out was maybe we could charge a levy per, you know, kg of fertiliser or something that could then fund the climate activities. But that was just one example.
Cool. Eugénie's made a comment about the Green Party calling for free public transport. And there is issues around the whole way public transport is funded, isn't there, in terms of the government nationally and locally. So my question around that, which I think is a great initiative in theory, that there is this danger that everybody supports public transport but doesn't use it. Wonder if you've got a comment about that.
Sorry, I just well, I would, but I've got a slightly flaky. I just moved the back end of your question there, Rosemary, sorry. So can you just repeat that last bit of your question?
Also, the danger is that everybody likes public transport, but they don't all use it, kind of thing. It's good for other people. I wonder how we deal with that. And also the Green Party is now calling for free public transport. How do you think that works as far as ECAN's concerned?
Yeah, so in terms of if everybody doesn't use it, well, obviously we need to increase patronage, and that's the reason for proposing doing a targeted free fare. But there is a bit of an iterative process that needs to go on, because we've had this where there've been 3 days of public transport before, where actually lots and lots of people do use it, and then it's a bit of a sort of messy day. You know, people can't necessarily get on the bus they want to. You know, there are times where you already, my son occasionally can't get onto his bus because it's full coming out of schools.
Yep. Vicky, I'll just, if you're having trouble, your bandwidth, could you turn your? I'm not sure we can see. So
turn
your video
yeah,
off.
so it's managing it in a way that means that we increase patronage while still providing good service. Yeah.
Cool. Kate Spencer's asked how many people on this call use public transport. We might do a poll later. Nathaniel, you got a question?
I do. It's just around the whole targeted rate, general rate for dealing with the flooding. Like, my instinct is like, well, of course the people who live by it should be the ones paying, because ultimately, like, we want to discourage them from living there, and also we're going to want to buy back that land for wetlands and stuff in the future. So making it less valuable through rates increases seems sensible. So I wonder if you could just say a bit more about why you think a general rate is a better idea.
I'm happy to jump in, Lan, initially. Hey, thanks, Nathaniel. I've had a little bit of experience working with drainage committees through district councils, mainly with Selborne District Council, which is sort of similar because they're targeted rates along these sort of human-made waterways, or often they used to be wetlands and they were drained, and now they're drains. And one of the challenges has been when it's just targeted rate payers, well, of course, they get to make all the decisions around how those drains are managed. And from, working with my runanga and marae, we've been pushing in, trying to say, hey, we want to be involved in these drains, because actually living in the drains are eels and all sorts of things, of course. And so when you can go to, and in a lot of those cases, we've pushed for a more general rate share in those drainage catchments, because when you do that, of course, you can share you can broaden the values that get taken into account in those decision makings. You can also put different decision makers on those committees, because it's no longer just those landowners that are on those committees anymore. It is runanga, etc. So I think there's some benefit of going a general rate for this, because it does bring in those other values more easily. So yeah, that's one reason. Yeah.
So targeting, this is just a whole thing I guess I'm completely unaware of. So targeting rates means that those people you're targeting then they have a say in the decision about how to use that money. This is it.
Yeah, because it's their money.
But that's interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it is interesting, and that's what a targeted rate does. If a group, and it doesn't just happen around waterways, it can happen for lots of things. For example, Christchurch residents pay a targeted rate for public transport because we're the ones that benefit from it. So yeah. Just on smaller scales. But the example I was talking about was a district council matter, which is a little bit different. But these regional rating districts do have their own committees as well. There is a little bit of work going on behind the scenes about reviewing those committees as well. So yeah, but it was all wrapped up in the general rate situation as well. The other benefit of it is, of course, you can collect greater resources to do more stuff. And when you have other values that are being reflected in the way it's managed, obviously we can get ecological values put to the forefront and they can be funded. Whereas in the past, you could imagine a sort of rural-based drainage committee or a river rating committee, their focus is on getting rid of the water. And so they spend their money in that way. So yeah, I think this is good because it broadens the rating base, the funding that can go towards it. And then you have the resources to put to those other values that we care about.
Cool.
And
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Craig. That was really helpful. John Gould?
Yes, good evening. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Great. Look, I'm going to talk about the bus issue, and from the perspective of Lincoln University, because I've been looking at sustainable transport issues there for about the last 5 years. It's been extremely frustrating because we still offer free parking to students and actually promote it as a selling point for coming to Lincoln University. So we've been encouraging carpooling and trying to give the opportunity for sort of dedicated parking for carpoolers. But recently, because we've seen that there's some, movement on the bus issue, we're really promoting that extremely hard, and we're actually giving out $20 of free Metro card top-up vouchers to students who present a Metro card this year. We've got almost $4,600 worth of vouchers, and that hopefully will start moving students. But obviously they have to be on a bus route, and there are many students from rural areas. But I've got a few points that I want to make, and they're general points. The first point is that empty buses, are huge polluters. Buses running with 1 or 2 passengers or empty, is the last thing you want. So we have to do everything we possibly can to get people onto the buses. And I don't know, if only 5% of the revenue is coming from zones 2 and 3, why bother having zones? Whichever system you go for, why not just have one zone for the whole area? Because it's actually extremely expensive for an adult to travel from, let's say, Prebbleton down the road to Lincoln, because they cross a zone boundary. So you pay $7.70 return. And that's, no wonder the buses are empty. So that's one point. Another thing is, if we need to look at carrots and sticks. The government is offering half-price bus fares for the next 3 months, and then tertiary students are going to get a discount from July. So we've really got some ammunition to try to encourage Lincoln students who are on bus routes to, switch to, get out of their cars if they do have that opportunity. And I think, but there's not enough publicity coming out of, ECAN or out of Metro, really saying what's on offer and encouraging things like multimodal transport. The buses all take bikes now. So, cycle to the nearest bus stop, either lock up your bike or put it on the bus, those kind of things. And finally, if Christchurch is producing over 50% of its emissions from transport, then you need to get central government involved to start coming up with some cash as well. Why charge $1.20 for child fares? $2 for adults, $1.20 for children. Why not $2 for adults, $1 for children? It's nice, neat, easy, sounds, straightforward. So anyway, you can hear I'm, pretty passionate about this. I'm definitely going to come with a submission. And, we just have to make using the buses cool, and, it's a whole cultural shift. So anyway, that's my 2 pence worth for what it's worth.
Thanks very much, John. Thanks for keeping on working on this out in Lincoln.
It's a pleasure.
Richard.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks very much for the interesting presentations. Out of the focus that you had, it didn't cover any changes to biosecurity and pest and weed work. And just a couple of observations about trends within that. And the first thing is the increased awareness of the impact of other pests that are currently not covered by the pest management strategy, like pigs and to a degree goats, though in Banks Peninsula there's ECAN assistance there, and that eventually, not before long, there'll be the same awareness and concern about deer on Banks Peninsula. I'm kind of wearing a pest-free Banks Peninsula hat here. And second thing, just anything in terms of the policies that are in terms of funding for biodiversity protection or enhancement recognition that removal of pests from forest and shrubland ecosystems actually improves the carbon fixation of those ecosystems, and therefore is a double benefit.
Thanks, Richard. I'll follow. Go back to Eugenie's got a question in the chat. What's happened to the immediate steps for biodiversity funding, which was part of the CWMS? Is that part of the Braided River revival? And what is the approximate spend? With increased investment in recovery from flooding, is ECAN taking more action to farmers encroaching on the rivers?
Might jump in there, and I think I might be able to answer
some of that
Richard's question as well.
Right.
So Richard, absolutely, we didn't touch on the biosecurity aspects. There has been, in the long-term plan, we did quite significantly increase biosecurity funding, but so like primarily that was tied to the Kaimahi for Nature, Jobs for Nature, central government funding. In saying that, there were a number of measures that we have taken that are still part of this annual plan. So things like we've just had started a guy called Dr. Morgan Shields, and he is ex-ag research, and I think he was an academic out at Lincoln as well. And his entire role is a community-focused role in moving ECAN's focus in biosecurity and pest management to the earlier part of the invasion curve, because we don't want to be, you know, where we are in a lot of places where we are, you know, there's the potential to just tip endless buckets of money into pests that are already well established. And I know that, you know, you'll know all this. But when it comes to the browsing predators that you talked about and that lack of integration where they fall outside the regional pest management plan, we are trying to take a leadership role there by actually bringing together the agencies. And actually, I think the meeting's next week where we're starting at the regional level of bringing together the agencies whose roles and responsibilities are in pest management, and especially those, you know, ungulate browsers, and actually establish their roles and responsibilities. And I know that always sounds ridiculous that, you know, agencies need to get together to understand what each other's do, but that's often the level we start with, right? And then from there, we're going to go at a smaller scale to essentially the sub-regions of the biosecurity advisory groups and have a much more localized look at how we tackle the pest predator issues in an integrated way, where we're actually all pulling our weight and we're not pointing the finger and everyone's confused about whose role it actually is. Oh, it's not us, it's MPI or whatever. So yeah, we're really trying to get away from that. It's a massive task, and I feel positive about where at least Environment Canterbury as an organisation is with it, but it's a massive challenge ahead. And then I think, just to turn now to Eugenie's question about the immediate steps biodiversity funding, what tended to happen with the zone committees is that although there were some really positive biodiversity projects happening with immediate steps funding, they weren't necessarily best bang for buck for actual biodiversity outcomes. So what we did was rejigged, we basically subsumed that funding back into Environment Canterbury for our ecologists, who are fantastic, to actually, you know, protect and regenerate biodiversity in ways that would be much more regionally significant. So we haven't taken away funding for the zone committees. They've still got 50K per annum and 75, I think going to 75 this next year. but we're just being much more explicit that that's actually about community engagement and really positive environmental things, but we're not trying to pretend that that is actually amazing biodiversity outcomes, because as you're well aware, it simply wasn't when it was like a pepper pot approach and there wasn't necessarily a strategic view or lens across it.
Thanks.
Was there any
can I just ask a question? Am I right in thinking that the annual plan is basically updating the long-term plan for changes, basically? So that's why it's not including everything. You know, basically you've looked at the long-term plan for this year and said, hey, we're not doing enough here that we thought we'd do, and we need to do more. Is that the main? Thank you. Thank you very much. That's helped me anyway. Colleen?
You can be a counsellor now, Rosemary.
Kia ora koutou. Look, the bus fares, I mean, I've put my own reflection back there because people were saying, do people on this call use buses? And mine, I realise, is an idiosyncratic situation, and that I am on the anxious end of the spectrum in relation to COVID. But it has had a huge impact on me, that the situation with COVID. And when I was using the buses and trying to use them a lot, cost was a problem, because particularly if my husband and I wanted to go into town together, then 2 adults going in was quite prohibitive, So, but I just want to know about the research behind this. I really do still need convincing that it is fares, because of having listened to Axel and other. Have you done research, or have you done surveys? Have you actually talked to other people, the broader scope of people, not just people like me, to get a steer on whether it would actually change behaviour? And I'm reflecting to what Rosemary said. It's all very well, on the face of it, it looks like a good idea to drop fares, and that will increase patronage. But is that real? Have you actually asked people? In Canterbury, I suppose I'm suggesting.
Yeah, so certainly the long-term plan, we had a number of submissions, particularly from students, which is where we picked up and pushed through to have a student fare start from July this year. But students absolutely came to us and talked about how much of a struggle it is to want to use the bus. It's the choice they wanted to use from a climate change point of view, but they just simply couldn't afford to make the climate friendly choice. We've also then really, as we were pushing through the student fares, of course, then there was the national campaign around these targeted fare groups, which sort of stemmed from Wellington, really looking at, in Wellington, they were looking at the equity issues and connected up across quite a range of groups of people. Some of them, like some of the religious, some were religious-based groups and poverty groups and student groups and so on. And so that sort of has fed into arriving at the proposal that we've got. And our staff went away and got modelling done. So we've had consultants model the different, what will happen if they do the different, those different options on fares. And that's where there's then those percentages of expected rise in passenger numbers. Now, there aren't that many places that have actually done this, and the only way you can go from a prediction to like the way you can improve your accuracy when you're modeling predicting is to actually run a trial, and that then shows you what how close were we to the predictions in the reality when we roll out the trial. And so to some extent, of course, it's not perfect. We also don't really know quite what's going to happen with COVID from now either. But it's certainly worth trying. The fare free, we do hear people saying those fares are expensive for us, and it's limiting people's opportunity. So people struggle to take journeys that they would like to take because of the cost of buses when you're in a really low income and don't necessarily have even access to a car. And then for other people, so like a family, I mean, I just same like you just said with 2 adults, well, 2 adults and 2 kids, you know, I've traveled a lot with the bus, but when it comes to 4 of us traveling, I would always take the car, because it's so expensive to take the bus at that point. And I think that's where I guess it's anecdotal at that point, but you know, I think it's worth giving it a try, and that will then provide the data for others in the future who will you know, look at, well, actually what happened when somewhere did do this. And this is the thing, is it's not been done as yet. It's not been done in New Zealand. We're putting it out there as a first, really. So you know, it's always a bit of uncertainty when you are the first.
Will the 3 months half price fares, will that operate as a bit of a trial for you?
It should do, yes, to some extent. Yes, it will. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Vicky.
I think it is important to acknowledge that I mean, price and cost is one lever, of course, and there are others. And we know that there is challenges with our public transport networks, of course, reliability, and what's the other one, Vicky? How frequent it is, frequency. They're all going to play a part. And to do that, we have to work with our other district councils as well. And it's good to see Mike there, City Council and Selwyn and Waimakariri, because that's important, because they often do the infrastructure for the buses, the roads, bus stops, etc. So there is a big job to work together to try to make that work. I know that we've got some, out where I live in Horsell, there's some upgrades planned, but they have to be put on hold because there's going to be major roadworks on Lincoln Road for the next couple of years. So if we bring in more frequent services, they're just going to be held up by roadworks for a year. So, I mean, that's some of the challenges that we face. Even though we're all trying to get to a better place, there's realities of the way we've done it in the past and where we're at right now. But, you know, we've got to keep moving. And someone else mentioned the rail issue, or, yeah, I mean, that's another great challenge for us to try to do together with our district councils as well and Kiwi Rail, to try to come up with some proposal that gets enough support from our community as well as the government, so that we could do something in that space. And there is work happening in that space right now. So,
Kia ora, Craig. Hey, Eric.
Oh, thanks, Rosemary. We seem very keen on buses tonight. I'd like to talk about the climate change levy, and some joined up thinking here and talking about bringing agencies together. I don't quite understand how any initiatives that ECAN takes will fit with any climate change initiatives that the city thinks it's taking, and how that in turn fits within the framework that the Climate Commission is setting out. And when I'm asked to pay a climate change levy, I'd find it altogether more convincing if I wasn't asked what might ECAN spend this on once it's raised the money, but what out of this short list of options that we have identified in relation to both the city and the commission, where do the priorities lie, in other words? And I think that would be politically rather more convincing, because it's a good idea in one sense, but as I heard it, it sounded like, you know, yet another attempt to throw small-scale money at small-scale problems that may make very little difference if it's not strategized and framed within something that's much more purposive and convincing at a regional level. And I'm talking here about the Commission, the City, Environment, Canterbury, other agencies. I mean, at some point, of course this is hard, but at some point, unless we're going to go underwater in the next 10 years, we have to do these things.
Kia ora, Eric. Hey, awesome insights and questions. Thanks so much. Look, we haven't obviously worked it all out yet around the climate levy. So you're right. There's a lot more work to do. We're asking the community whether they think that's a good idea. But you're right. Some detail would be good. We've already got a few challenges that Environment Canterbury are facing, of course, and 2 of them are in the other 2 bits that we're consulting on, public transport and the river recovery issues that are not going to go away, and they are going to be climate related. So we already have those challenges as ECAN. So that's one reason to look at this space. And I suppose what we've raised by looking at the river recovery rate across the general rate scheme is that we think this is a way to get everybody involved and paying for these issues rather than just targeted people. So that's one thing. Look, and I think, of course, we need to be working with central government and our local councils as well on what is the biggest way we can make a response. So look, I don't have the answers for that, Eric, but I agree. That's the work that we need to go through right now in terms of what is the best response. But I'm sure Lan and Vicky will have some other ideas.
Yeah, kia ora, Eric. Look, I think it's a really good point to make in terms of where is the bigger picture here. And I hope I've got this right in terms of my knowledge of where the Climate Commission is in relation to the government and what the government's about to come out with. So the Commission has, essentially reported to the government, and the government have consulted on their draft emissions reduction plan, which, if I recall correctly, was meant to come out sometime last year, but is actually delayed now to come out as part of the May budget. Now, what's really critical with that is that that will provide the structure of what our emissions are and what they need to be reduced by and who needs to reduce them and by how much, because currently we don't have that structure. And so I do want to emphasize to people tonight that although it's the free fares aspect that came through in this annual plan, we are really trying to pull all the levers we can. So, and maybe Mike's just about to refer to this, but, we are working more closely with the City Council. We are trying to appeal to ministers and government to be part of this, but we're actually trying to show that we're serious. And that's why, although in terms of public backlash, things like 24% rate rises being proposed 2 years in a row generates a lot of, backlash from our community. We are actually conscious that we want government to see that at a regional level, we're really trying and we're pushing the envelope. You look across the district and city councils, and a lot of their rate rises, especially for this annual plan, are often far below inflation. Okay, so that should be concerning to all of us, that we are not doing enough, because there's, in my opinion at least, it's sort of like there would be no amount that we could possibly pay that would make it okay in terms of our generation or this current generation's contribution to these issues. So we're pulling all the levers. There is a bigger picture that we're part of and we're not blind to it, but it is difficult to see when all these kind of different things come from everywhere, and you're sort of like, how does it all relate? So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sort of, Lan. Hey, Mike, welcome.
Thank you. It's always actually great listening to my three favourite ECAN councillors. And I sometimes think actually just a combined council with certain councillors on it would actually make a huge difference, and we'd get a lot achieved. But we've got ECAN and we've got the district and city councils, and we're trying to do our best. And I will try and get to a question by the end of this little bit. But I have noticed this term, compared to last term, the collaboration between the ECAN councillors and city councillors is so much different. It was clear I was on the public transport joint committee last term, and it was very clear that the ECAN commissioners really were just taking a commercial business approach to public transport instead of actually looking at public transport as a social good. So I totally applaud ECAN for putting out this proposal. And I think we all know that free fares is just one thing that we need to do to actually get public transport working. And I don't actually think free fares for everyone is the right way to go. I think ECAN's approach is the right one, where we're targeting it to the people that actually see fares as a barrier, because not everyone sees that as a barrier. But the other big issue that we need to sort, obviously, is if you don't have access to public transport, it doesn't matter if it's free or there's a cost, it's not going to work for you. And so I know Lan and Vicky and myself and Sarah took notice of motions to our relevant councils, where we're asking the Mayor and Chair to actually go talk to the Minister of Transport to let them know that actually Christchurch is ready for serious public transport investment. We have an approved public transport plan for the city, approved by Waka Kotahi. So that conversation should be happening very soon. So, I'm hopeful that we'll see investment from central government, because I think we all realise that the councils can't do it by themselves. We just don't have the rating mechanism for councils is terrible. It's wrong, and it doesn't set us up to succeed. It sets us up to fail our communities. So if that's what we got, we have to work in partnership with central government. And I can see that happening. So I think we're headed in the right place with public transport, but we need to realise it's more than just fares. It's frequency, routes, it's making the buses nicer to use, but it's going in the right direction, and we're integrating it with our cycleways, with land use. So all that's heading in the right direction. I guess one of the questions I have, and forgive me, I haven't read your annual plan in detail yet, but I will be putting a submission in. There's always a focus on public transport, and I'm just wondering if biodiversity and the natural environment is getting lost a bit, and whether you're actually putting that message across well enough in your annual plan.
I think, like we talked about earlier on, thanks, Mike. We really made a big push in the long-term plan around biodiversity and environmental outcomes. So I think that's where we did it. And this, like Rosemary said, this annual plan is, looking at that long-term plan and making those changes that we think are needed right now. So, yeah, look, it probably is for this annual plan. There's probably an acknowledgement that we've raised these three key issues. But of course, within the climate change levy and actually within the river recovery, they obviously do have a link back to restoration, for example, through the river recovery work and the climate change levy. So we're still there, but I agree. I mean, people probably could see it as being missed, but it is in the plan already, like we explained right at the start of the presentation. So yeah.
Yeah. I know it's all in there in the background. It's just the messaging, I guess. Yeah. If it's not front and center, then people may not see the great mahi that you're actually doing. And it always, the 24% is a shame, because actually if you folded your rates into our rates, it'd probably only be 2% or something really small like that. When you're saying from very low base, it doesn't take much to make it look worse than it is if you use a percentage. But no, you're doing great stuff. On the roadworks on Lincoln Road, that's for a bus lane too. So
yeah, I agree.
That's good.
Yeah, it'll be great.
Mike, I did just want to follow up on that though, because you raise a really good point in terms of just making it clear to everyone. Like I always say to staff, if only we could actually just tell the community what we're doing, because you can see our annual plan and consultation documents. They are actually guided by Audit New Zealand standards. They're not actually and look, I think this is the way our staff interpret the rules as well, personally. But yeah, we don't, like, I wish we were flying flags about all this amazing stuff we're doing. But continually it's like, oh no, that doesn't meet audit requirements. Or, you would pick up nothing from our annual plan that this targeted free fare initiative was potentially something we might be excited about as a council. That there are positive things here. It's so dry, and I just want people to know that, because often you do look at them and you're like, does this council even care? Like, are there humans in here? But I want to assure you that we are there and we do care, and we are like raging at this stuff all the time.
So I just thought about something. Oh, sorry, Rosemary.
Just ask a question about when we make our submissions. is it worth saying, hey, listen, we think this is really important and this needs, you know, like the biodiversity stuff, and please keep on doing it. And we should say the things that we're passionate about, as well as saying what we're thinking about the changes, if you like. Is that important?
Definitely, Rosemary. Because like we've said, in the rest of the annual long-term plan, and that's still in this annual plan, but other than those 3 topics, of course, most of the issues that people will raise will be covered in there. And if they're not, we want those gaps highlighted, but we also want support for the stuff that's already in there, so that we can keep arguing with our colleagues to keep supporting that. So yeah, for sure.
Somebody, Collins asked about Me Uru Rako. What were the changes? That was going to be cut back a little bit. So that is,
I think it's 300,000 cut back out of the program. Yeah.
But we should say something about it if we're...
Yeah, of course. Like if you feel that it's, I mean, hey, I think Lan's big on this too. Like if you want to see us do more, then tell us that.
Yes.
Because that's important, because that allows us then to continue to put the pressure on staff and their other colleagues to say, let's keep doing more, people. We're not doing enough. Yes, that might equal more rates, but like Mike said, if you compare it to a district council rate, we're smaller, you know. So yeah. I did want to pick up on, I think it was Mark had a question in there, and it does relate to the question that Mike asked too. So one of the big things that is in our annual plan that is a little bit hidden, that could deliver major environmental outcomes in time, is the planning reform that we're going on, that Lan mentioned at the bottom of that first slide. You know, our RPS, our water plans, and our coastal plan all being reviewed. You know, that's a massive piece of work that hasn't happened before, where they've all been done at once. And of course, this is in the background of legislative change around the RMA, the Natural and Built Environment Act that's proposed, etc. And Mark's question there, and I mean, if we can get that right, because I think we're all probably of the same mind that our plans that we've currently got aren't good enough. We've got Otu Wharekai, the Ashburton Lakes, that are proving that. So, you know, that planning work could be amazing. But Mark's question there about the Balancing Act, well, of course, that is what the RMA did set up. The purpose of that act was sustainable development, and you had to balance, decision makers had to balance social, economic, environmental, cultural, when they made the decisions. Well, the proposed new act is, the purpose of the act would be to mana o te taio, which, if you like, means to uphold the mana of the environment. First and foremost, there is no Balancing Act anymore. And I think that's really quite critical. I know you, Janie's shaking her head. It might take a wee bit of time for that to filter through, but if that is the purpose of the Act, that is what it is. Over time, that could be played out through the courts. But I also think the other thing I like about the proposals is that it's no longer just an effects-based legislation. There is the proposal to have outcomes-based applications and decision making. So you'd have to not only prove or disprove or mitigate an effect, you'd have to do something about an outcome that the region has proposed. So I think that's exciting.
Cool.
I'm an optimist, Eugenie.
Well, it's the other side of it. As citizens, it's our job to continue to say, this is what we want. This is what's important for us. So keep pushing. Hey, thanks everybody for you three for coming and doing this with us. It's been fantastic, and I've got a few things noted down. Cynthia has for adding to our submission. And so thanks heaps. I'm going to remove that spotlight. I've lost Vicky there somewhere. Any final words?
I am here.
Yeah. Any final words? Look, appreciate it.
I'm always keen for a final word. No, I just want to say, yeah, thank you so much for being involved and engaged in what is often not the most compelling stuff. But yeah, your submissions really will help us do the very best we can with the limited tools that we have. I do just want to flag as well, especially for all you people on the call who are especially capable and switched on, that it's local government elections this year. And, you know, who are politicians? They're actually just human beings who are just sort of giving things a crack to try and make the world a little bit better. And I always just want to remind people of that in case they've never ever thought about running themselves, but that is potential for anyone, and we could do it together. So you wouldn't be alone, but we're always looking for people to run. And if you know anyone, like, get in touch with us and that kind of thing. So thanks so much, Rosemary, and over to you to close.
Do you want to finish off, Craig? Kia ora.
Hi, kia ora, Lan. Kia koe, Rosemary, mō tō mahi whakahaere o tātou nei hui, tātou nei wā, tēnā koe. Kia koutou katoa, ka hui hui mai nei. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou, nā mihi te aroha, nā mihi mahana kia koutou, mō koutou whakaaro. Tēnā koutou. He karakia whakamutunga o tātou nei hui. Unuhia ki te uru tapu nui a tāne, kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua, i te ara takata, koia rā e rongo, whakiiri aki ki ruka kia tīna, haumi e, hui e, tā. Ko Māori e koutou. Thank you.
Thank you.